Hey everybody, this is Erica, the technology nerd who likes to film stuff, and today is the in-depth review of the LG G2. Now, I've enjoyed a lot of my time with this phone. There are some really nice features on this phone. But the interesting thing is that LG has pretty much put 2 steps ahead with some of the features, and then with other features they've taken a couple of steps backward. But overall, this is a very nice phone, and I want to show you everything that you could possibly think of or want to know about, from the screen, to the camera, to the software, to the processors. And hopefully I can help you decide if this is the phone for you, or whether you should wait for one of the other S800 phones that will be coming out on the market, or ones that are already available. So come on, Mr. LG G2, let's go and check you out. Alrighty, we're going to take a look around the phone, and also I'm going to be talking about the build quality. On the front here we have a 5.2-inch display. It is Gorilla Glass 2, it's not Gorilla Glass 3 like we have on the Galaxy S4. The pixel density is 424 pixels per inch. What I'm noticing is that while it does look very sharp by itself, when I'm comparing it to some other phones, such as the Galaxy S4, I see that this one's a little bit sharper at 441, about that pixels per inch. Even though it has that pentile diamond matrix, this still looks a little bit sharper than what we have on here, not to mention this is a smaller display. Even though this is Gorilla Glass 2, I haven't had any issues with it scratching yet. It's held up very well, being shoved into my pocket, so I'm not worried about it being Gorilla Glass 2 over Gorilla Glass 3. The glass is curved a little bit like we've seen on Galaxy phones such as the Galaxy Note 2 and the Galaxy S3. Now, while these curved displays look really nice and feel quite great to slide your finger across, I really am not preferring these anymore, especially if you want to put a plastic screen protector over it, because it tends to bubble up at the edges, so you have to choke up a little bit on that screen protector and you don't end up protecting the entire display, unless you get one of those wet install screen protectors like the Zag. So keep that in mind when looking for screen protectors for this guy. The display is curved a little bit, so that might limit your choices for screen protectors that will protect the entire display. The feel of the build of this phone feels a lot like the Galaxy S4, maybe just a little bit more rounded and slightly bigger. Now, unlike the Korean model, the back cover on the LG G2 does not come off. It does feel more sturdy than the Korean model of the LG G2, simply because you can't take the back cover off. So it's nice that it feels very sturdy, but with the LG G2 Korean model, you did have an SD card slot as well, and that's very lovely because this camera that we have on the back is capable of 1080p 60p video. So at 32 gigabytes internal storage, you have that filling up rather quickly, and you don't have any way to expand that memory. So that is something that bothers me about this version of the phone. I think that the Koreans might have done it right. So, taking a further look around the phone, we have a pinhole microphone that we have right here. This is something that I did not see in the Korean version of the phone. As for other microphones, we have a microphone right here as well. And then we've also got a microphone right here on the bottom. Now, when I tested this out during video, it seemed I was able to pick up sound from all 3 microphones, from this one, and this one. Now, looking at the rest of the bottom, yes, I mentioned this is a microphone. This is your speaker. You've got your micro USB port for charging and such. You've got a standard headphone jack. On the front, we have a 2.1 megapixel front-facing camera. You've got your notification LED, your receiver, and then the rest of this phone is completely butt naked, except for the SIM tray, which is right here. So as promised, what do I think about this brand new button layout, and is this something that I find useful? In about a word, no, not really. I honestly don't see the need at all to place my hands at the back of this phone. Actually, my hands are pretty small, and for people who have smaller hands or maybe even larger hands, it becomes a bit cumbersome to try to move your fingers in the right place. Yes, at least these buttons are easy to find, but a lot of the times I'm still trying to figure out where to place my finger. I'm accidentally putting my finger on top of the lens all the time and getting it all mucky and gucky, and it has fingerprints to no end. So no, I don't really like this volume rocker at the back. I would honestly still prefer a button that's at the top and out of the way, or I'd like to have buttons that are within reach with the natural grip of my hand. A lot of the times I hold my phone like this, I found out. I really don't naturally do this. Now, before we are entirely overwhelmed with negativity, I will say that there is one really great thing about having the buttons on the back. When I go to take pictures, for instance, I don't have to move my hands around or go fishing around inside the phone at all. Instead, all I have to do is hold this down for a couple of seconds. It activates my camera, and I can take pictures just like this by pushing that back button. It doesn't matter, I can actually press this one as well. You can press this one or this one and take a picture. And of course, this doesn't only work for portrait mode. You can then twist your arm and you can see that you've got a good grip for landscape as well without having to ever adjust my hand to take a photo. What I ended up finding is that when I am running around everywhere, I've got my purse and stuff in my hands, I found this to be quite useful that I can hold my phone, I don't have to readjust my hands in any way, shape, or form, and I can take as many pictures as I would like. So honestly, having the buttons on the back has encouraged me to take more pictures. So for functionality of having the volume buttons here and there, it's kind of a novelty. But if you're somebody who wants to take photos all the time and you don't have a lot of hands handy, then this is great. Now, as for a size comparison, I would consider this to be a mid-sized phone. As I mentioned before, it's very much similar to the size of the Galaxy S4. It's just a tad bit wider than the Galaxy S4, and it's just a little bit longer. And surprisingly, it really isn't all that thin either. With that stacked 3000 mAh battery inside of here, it's a little bit thicker than the Galaxy S4. Sitting side by side, it's really about the thickness of the HTC One. So it's not an incredibly thin phone, but it feels very sturdy and nice in the hand. As for comparisons with other phones, here we have the Xperia Z Ultra. Here we have a Galaxy Note 2. You can see really how it stacks up to the Note 2. We're just going to make a little bit of a size sandwich here. And we've got a Galaxy S4 right here. And we've got an iPhone 5. So this gives you a good idea of how they all stack up, literally. Now moving on to the display, I call this the candy display, quote unquote. Some would actually just call it eye candy. There is a lot to be said about the display here. This display is 5.2 inches like I mentioned. It is big, and yes, it is actually very pretty. As far as viewing angles of this display, this is an IPS display, so it's got wide viewing angles, and I'm not seeing color shifting, which is really great. To the eye, this display is very saturated and the colors pop like crazy. Looking at this display is anything but a boring experience. It reminds me quite a bit of AMOLED without it being actually AMOLED. That's something that a lot of people are going to really like. You get a brighter display than AMOLED and it looks really good in sunlight. There is a reason, however, that I call this the candy display. Not so much to me because it's eye candy, but because the colors are so oversaturated that it looks like candy to me. When I was playing Candy Crush Saga, I could easily see just how saturated the reds are and just how neon green the greens are. So that means that there is something sinister at play here. Now what kind of bothers me is that in the United States press release, LG had mentioned inside that press release that this display has color accuracy, saying that the colors are accurate. Now while I don't mind if LG wants to make an experience and wants to oversaturate it so that it looks very similar to AMOLED, yes indeed, they do a very good job of that, it's not fair to call this an accurate display. Now when talking about accuracy, I don't care about degree of error compared to other displays. This display by itself is the most oversaturated LCD display that I have ever seen. In all honesty, you're either going to really like this or not. Some people really like having punchy colors on a phone display. It creates an awesome experience. It creates an experience almost different from reality. I'm going to show some measurements of this display so I can show you what I'm talking about in terms of the oversaturation and how LG is doing it. Now, I've been watching movies and I've been watching dark scenes, and thankfully movies actually look all right. So I'm not complaining about issues when watching movies. I have now turned the brightness down to about 50%. Now in day-to-day usage, the one thing that I am noticing is that because this display is very saturated, what it does is it actually makes the display more dim, if you will. So I'm left with the impression sometimes that I need to jack up the brightness all the way. That's something that I'm going to be explaining as well. So let's go and check all that out. This first image that we are looking at here is the CIE diagram of the LG G2. It does two different things. It shows the range of colors that this display is able to produce, which is a little bit wider than sRGB, especially in green. All decent displays these days should at least be sRGB for the color range or gamut. So really no problem here. The second thing that we can see here is what's going on with the saturations of the colors, or the vibrancy of the colors, if you will. What you can see here is a bunch of colored dots, and in an ideal world, all of these colored dots are supposed to be in a straight line and evenly spaced. But if you look at green, yellow, red, blue, and cyan, you can see that they are definitely not evenly spaced. And up towards the corners of the triangles, you can see that they get closer together. This is where you can see that the colors are very saturated. So just giving green as an example, there's actually 5 dots here. There's a dot for 0%, 25%, 50%, 75%, and 100%, which is the max amount of a certain color that you're able to see. But if you look at the dot for 75%, it's right next to 100%. So that basically means that colors are going to be too green for what they're supposed to be. And that's how you're getting very punchy looking colors. Now, with this idea in mind, imagine the other colors as well. They're simply just too saturated for what they're supposed to be. This is an effect that a lot of people like, and it's also a reason that people like AMOLED. Things look very punchy. Although AMOLED achieves its punchy colors because it has a wider range of colors it can show. The G2 doesn't have a very wide range of colors. They're just manipulating the vibrancy of the colors. So the next thing that we're looking at is the gamma chart of the LG G2. On the left-hand side, you have shadows. In the middle, you have midtones. And on the right, you have highlights. These three lines, red, green, and blue, should be along the gamma 2.2 line, but you can see for highlights and midtones that it goes up way too high. When you make gamma high, it's going to not only increase saturation, but it's also going to decrease the brightness. So as I was explaining before, some images tend to look a little bit too dark, and that's because the gamma is too high. And that's the price to pay for very high saturation. But overall, after getting used to the saturation of this display and seeing how it plays out in certain content, it is definitely an experience. It's a different one. It's not an accurate one. But honestly, I even have a hard time disliking this display. So while they have done some interesting things with the calibration, it's not terrible. Now moving on to processors. Here we have the Z Ultra, our little friend here, our big little friend, and we've also got the LG G2. Both of these guys have the new Snapdragon S800 SoC. They've got 4 crate cores for the CPU, and it's also got the new Adreno 330 GPU. Finally, something different. It took them so long to get away from the Adreno 320. Now, the place where these two guys differ is that this is actually the higher band version of the S800. This guy is 2.3 GHz or 2.26 GHz measured speed versus the 2.2 GHz of the Xperia Z Ultra. So basically, this one's at a higher frequency or clock speed as far as the CPU goes, and also it's lower voltage. So this is the better version of the S800, and this is technically the cheaper one. Now, in all practicality and in day-to-day use, I don't notice any difference between the two of these in terms of performance, at least where the CPU lies. They're both very blazingly fast. I can't notice a difference even in web browsing. But the interesting thing is that the G2 doesn't score so well usually when you're doing benchmarks. I noticed that even in Nantech, when they had a pre-release version, they were noting that it just wasn't scoring as well as they had expected. And now that this is a carrier version that has been released, I'm seeing that it's not doing any better with those benchmarks. But seriously, I don't see a difference in all day-to-day use, so who really cares? Where I am seeing a noticeable and legitimate difference is actually with the GPUs. They both have the Adreno 320 GPU, but in my general day-to-day usage, especially while playing games, I've noticed that the Xperia Z Ultra was just smoother. There was something that was just very different feeling to me. So I was able to do some benchmarks to try to see what it was that I was seeing. Was there really a difference? And yes, I would say that in general, the Xperia Z Ultra did a lot better for me during gameplay. It just had a feeling of being a lot smoother. And that would be because this guy does a little bit better with frame rates. In every GPU benchmark that I have looked at thus far, the Xperia Z Ultra has bested the G2. You can see here that it only won out by a couple of frames, but in the real world, it translated to a smoother experience for me. Unless you've played with both of these phones, you're probably not going to notice. The gameplay is indeed satisfactory. All I'm really noticing is that the frame rates aren't as good as I would hope they would be, especially when looking at the Z Ultra. But in general, I doubt that anybody is going to notice. Now on to the interface and LG customization. This is Jellybean 4.2.2. Dare I say this is one of the most customized versions that I have ever seen. I would say that it's very heavily skinned. People are either going to like it or they won't. Probably the most standout feature of this entire interface is found underneath gestures. It's called knock on. You can turn on and off the screen. So just say if there is anything on the screen, you can go up to the status bar and double tap it, and it's going to turn off. And if you want to turn the phone back on, you just need to tap twice on the display. But if you try tapping in the middle when the screen is on, nothing's going to happen. So of course, to remedy that, just go ahead and touch the status bar twice. Voila! Well, I think that this is a pretty neat feature and something that I really liked at first. It turned out to be a little bit annoying because the way they have it implemented, for some reason, if I'm holding the display, you can see it just happened there. If I'm moving the phone around, I'm not even lifting my thumb right now. If I move the phone around, it turns itself on. So if you're somebody who holds your phone like this when you're walking about and moving, I find that I'm dialing people all the time, or I'm doing something that I really shouldn't be doing. So after this initial wow factor wore off and I realized how much of a pain in the butt this feature actually was, I simply just disabled it. I think with an update or two that LG can figure out how to implement this better, but until then it's useless. So to explore the rest of the features of this phone, there's some interesting things that you can do, particularly with icons. Just say that you don't like the stock icons and you want to change it. Yes, actually you can do that quite easily, and you can do that default with the phone. So if you don't like an icon, you can go ahead and hold it down, and then you're going to see that there's a little paintbrush that appears. If you click on that paintbrush, you are presented with a bunch of icon choices. You can also decide to put your own icon in here if you wish with your own photo, but here we have an appealing looking chat icon. I can choose it to be just the regular size, so let's just say alright. So here we are, this is now Google Hangout. And I can also decide to make it larger. I don't know why you would need it to be this particular size. That's a little ridiculous. But you're going to see it. You're never going to lose sight of this on any panel. So that's nice. Another interesting thing that you can do with some of LG's own custom icons is if you hold them down, you can see that there are little blue corners. When you hold these little blue corners, you can actually get to a widget. So I went from the gallery icon and I was able to upscale it, and once I did that, we have the ability to get into our albums. I think this is a pretty cool feature. It would be even cooler if I could do this with any type of icon, but with customizations you can only do so much. So let's go ahead and pull that back downward, and you can see that we've now got a miniature icon there. Holding down on the display is going to bring up your apps, widgets, and wallpapers section. You can also do the exact same thing by hitting the menu button and hitting Add Apps and Widgets. Also from right here, you have access to home screen settings and lock screen settings, so everything is easily accessible. Of course, any of the settings that you see here can be accessed by hitting all settings. Also, you can go to the drop down at the very top and hit this guy here, and it brings you to the exact same place. Underneath the display inside of the settings tab is where all the interesting things are at. Underneath the lock screen settings, I really like that there is weather animations. It reminds me a lot of HTC Sense. So if I'm to turn off the phone, and if I turn it back on, I can see what the weather is like depending on my area. You can see that it was cloudy at that point. If it's raining, I think I get a windshield wiper and some raindrops. So it's something that I have seen before, and it gives it a little bit of a lively feel. You can customize the animation from your lock screen, so just say that I want ripple. When I turn the phone back on, you can see the little leaves and petals are floating across the screen. I like that. That's quite cute. And then it opens back up here. Another interesting feature that we have here is called Front Touch Buttons. If you click on that, you can see that you can customize what you've got at the bottom. We no longer have capacitive buttons. These are right on the screen. You can choose the layout that you would like. The one thing that bothers me though is that there is no task switcher button. None of these have a task switcher. This guy here launches Quick Memo, and this guy here actually pulls down your status bar. So I find it to be a little bit annoying sometimes because if I want to get to my task switcher, I have to hold down on that home button. It's not that difficult to access, but it would have been really nice if they would have included the ability to choose if I wanted to have the task switcher in here or not. You also have the ability to set the theme. In this case, I chose black because if you leave it at white, you start to see that white obstructs games and it looks very noticeable. So if you keep it at black, this screen has a decent enough contrast ratio so that it doesn't look annoying. You can also decide whether you want the launcher screen to be transparent. As you can see here, this is transparent. And if you uncheck it, you can see that you are left with this white bar at the bottom, or black bar, or black or white bars that have a gradient. I don't think this looks very classy at all. I prefer just having it see-through. Some other settings that we have underneath the display section are Smart Screen and Smart Video. These are very Samsung-esque and are just really a copycat right out of Samsung's pages. So you've probably seen these if you've ever used a Samsung phone. This is Smart Screen, so it's going to look every once in a while to see if your face is looking at the display, such as if you are browsing the web. If it sees that your face is not looking at the display, it's going to dim and then turn off the display. For Smart Video, it works just like Smart Pause. If you are watching a video, if you look at the display, it plays. If you turn your face away from the display, it stops. So thanks for that interesting copycat there, LG. Also, like Samsung, when you pull down the status bar, you can see that you have this toggle section above that you can scroll through, and you can turn on or turn off various settings. You've also got access to a brightness toggle, and one setting that seems to be exclusively LG's is Q-Slide. If you hit Q-Slide, you can see that there are a couple of applications that pop upward, and these are basically like multitasking. Inside of any application, you're able to use whatever it is that you select. So just say that you want to use the calculator. You can resize the calculator, you can drag it around. I can see it on any screen that I am using. What I like about Q-Slide is that I am able to change the transparency. So if I'm trying to look at the screen below it, I can go ahead and slide it, and it's pretty much transparent by now. And if I want to see it again, I can mess around with the transparency, and boom, there it is. My major complaint here is that these are kind of half-baked. This could be a very awesome implementation, just say if I wanted to do messaging. We are met with a messaging box. The thing is that once you send a message, the box disappears. It would be nice if this was a legitimate chat box that just stayed here. A great example where this could be useful is in something like Candy Crush Saga. If any of you are huge fans of Candy Crush Saga, then you probably know that if somebody's texting you, it's annoying to have to go and look and see what they're doing, and then you have to come back and get re-immersed in the game. If this was a legitimate chat box, I could easily take the slider, and there you go. You can see that it's pretty much entirely transparent. So anytime somebody texts you, you can go ahead and change the opacity, and I could sit here texting until I decide to go back to my game. So why LG? Why didn't you make these fully functioning? As soon as I make a text message, this box disappears. This type of thing would be really awesome for Google Hangout as well. So these little Q-Slide apps I find to be really pointless because they don't do anything. They look nice, they have a potential feature, but then they just derp out. A feature that I really do like, though, is called Quick Memo. When you hit the Quick Memo button, you can either write on the display, you can circle things, you can point out specific things that you're looking at. It can be on any current screen that you're on. Also, if you hit this button here, you can see that it brings you into a note application, and you can save it from here into Notebook or underneath Gallery. Hitting this button again is going to bring me back to whatever current page that I am looking at. A great feature that I feel that LG did do right with this quick memo setting is just say that I have a phone number and I need to remember this and I don't want this screen to go away. I can hit this icon right here and it's going to leave whatever it was that I had written with quick memo on my screen. You can see that it has a minimizing box. If I click on that, it's just going to bring me back into quick memo. Click on that again and it's going to leave an overlay. So I can go underneath phone, for example, and right here I can see exactly what it is that I need to type. In this case, 858-222-222222, whatever, just a random number. But I like that, that's nice. If you don't want those annoying numbers overlaid on here anymore, just go ahead and get rid of quick memo and it disappears. Very cool. As for other various settings, one that I think people will probably like is called one-handed operation. Now you're able to enable a one-handed keyboard for either the dial pad, that's going to be where the phone is, such for example. You can see now that even with my teeny tiny little hands, I can even reach all the numbers here on this button pad. And also for things like texting, if you have the LG keyboard enabled, you're able to enable that one-handed keyboard as well. Now, of course, you can choose which side that you would like it to be on, so it's not going to favor people who are right or left-handed. We've also got an interesting feature that's called Slide Aside, which basically makes applications more easily accessible. It works as a kind of multitasking. I was complaining about how you have to hold this down in order to get to your recent application list, but a nice feature that they have is the ability to open up an application, for example, and if you want it to be easily accessible, all you have to do is take 3 fingers and swipe it out of the way. You can see it says app saved. You can have 3 apps saved. So we're going to go ahead and open up navigation and we're going to swipe it aside. You can see that it says app saved and let's just say notepad. Let's go ahead and swipe that aside. And if you want to access them from anywhere, you can just take the 3 fingers and swipe downward a little bit or straight across. And here you are, you can select any of them. You can swipe them away or you can hit the X's. So this is a feature that a lot of people will probably like. It makes your most relevant applications easy to access without having to hold down on your task switching button or the home button. So I find this to be quite nice. Also, it works well, so I'm not trying to activate it awkwardly all the time. So thank you, LG. That was at least nicely implemented. We've also got a feature that's called guest mode, which is something that I actually really like because there's a lot of people in my house always messing around with my stuff, playing with my phones. So simply being able to make a mode where there's approved applications and a profile that's separate from everything that I do is a very good idea. All you need to do is to enable guest mode, and you need to set a pattern. You need to set one for your own profile and also for the guest mode profile. And then you can go through and choose all the approved apps that you would like. So once you lock the phone, when you turn it back on, you're going to be presented with a lock screen. In this case, I have set G as the G2 guest mode. And you can see right here the apps that I had approved along with all the default applications. So this is very, very handy. The last thing that's worth mentioning on this phone is something that all big screen phones seem to have these days, and that would be the notebook. We have a notepad and a notebook. Notepad is pretty much just like notebook, except for it has less features. But underneath notebook, they have a pretty nicely functioning little notebook here. When you open it up from left to right, you see that you have a little pen here. When you turn that on, it's going to be read-only mode so that you can look at your document at will without accidentally editing it. You have buttons where you can undo or redo a marking. You've got a text box area. You've got a pen tool area. Now this display is not a Wacom display. It doesn't have a Wacom stylus included with it, so there are no degrees of pressure. You're able to control the thickness though. So you have things like pen, marker, paintbrush, and pencil. You can also choose the thickness for your eraser tool. And like any good note-taking application, you have the ability to add several different things, whether it be stickers, images. You can take photos right from here and have it inside of here and edit it. You can add audio, you can add maps, you can add date and time, schedule, so it's fully functional as a note-taking application. And then of course you can save it, or you can share it to these various options. The part that I think is actually most useful here is this area at the bottom. If you click on this guy here, it's going to allow you to zoom in. So if you're trying to have an area where you're getting very specific details, you can shrink the box very far downward. So just say if I write test in the smallest pen tool possible, you can see here in itty bitty little writing that I was able to write test. So that's great. If you're somebody who likes to draw a lot, this allows you to get very, very in depth with the details without having issue of the thickness of the pen tools. Also, I love that you can choose cover. Under cover, you can choose from the various cover styles that they already have here, or you can add your own image. So let's just choose this interesting looking playful one. Then you can go ahead and decide to name it or decorate as you'd like. And then from then on, everything is going to be classified under this as a specific notebook. So going outward, here we have our brand new note, and it's very easily classified and easy to find. Now, getting into battery life, one thing that I am very happy to announce with this phone is that I've had really decent battery life out of this guy. This isn't a phone where I'm worried that I'm going to run out of battery during the day. As you can see here, this is a pretty heavy day of usage. I was able to get easily 6 hours and 30 minutes of screen time, and this is using it heavily all throughout the day, 12 hours and 29 minutes. So if you can think, if you're using the phone for 12 hours and 29 minutes, that's a single day, and you're using 6 hours and 32 minutes of screen time, you can imagine that this phone will probably last you 2 days at least, or maybe even a little bit more if you're using it lightly. So this is definitely not a phone that I worry about battery life for. For medium usage, where I'm using the phone all throughout the day, but not really heavily and not doing very intensive tasks, I was easily able to get 40 hours and 35 minutes on battery, and still I was able to hit over the 5-hour screen time mark. So battery life is pretty impressive. One thing that I noticed though is that gameplay, when you're playing graphic intensive games, will kill the battery pretty quickly. I was playing Need for Speed, and what I noticed is that it was losing about a percentage every minute. That's pretty extreme. So playing something like Need for Speed at 100% battery, if you play it until it's dead, you're getting like an hour and 40 minutes of straight intensive gameplay. And that is something that isn't very impressive. So for me, the GPU was a definite power hog. If you're somebody who is going to be playing intensive games all throughout the day, that's probably one scenario where you're going to be needing to charge this guy more than one time a day. But if you're not playing a lot of graphic intensive games, this guy lasts for quite some time. Now, talking about things like the antennas and call quality, I can see that call quality was very clear for me. I experienced no troubles with that. As far as data speeds and reception, that is something that is very, very subjective. That's really going to depend on your own network and what the signal strength is like. But comparatively in my own environment, I've noticed that it performs about the same as the other phones that I have, so it's fine. It does fine on reception. Wi-Fi and Bluetooth all work just fine. I haven't had any issues with those. The one thing, though, that I have had quite a bit of issues with is the GPS. I don't know what it is with the GPS, but I've actually seen other people complaining the same thing. When I'm using this phone to navigate somewhere, I notice that the GPS isn't exactly calibrated properly. It's a little bit laggy, so it tells me to turn after I was already supposed to turn. And if I was going the wrong way, it takes quite a few seconds. It took up to 15 seconds at one point to reroute. That was the most extreme situation. But when I was in Seattle on a turnoff, I was trying to figure out which way on the freeway I was supposed to stay on the fork. It told me that I was going in the wrong direction for several seconds while I was continuing on in the right direction. So I had no idea at one point where I was going. This is not something that I usually see as a problem with the navigation, but I'm hoping that LG is able to fix this. This is not okay if you're wanting to use this as a GPS, and that is something that I noted as a major problem. So fix that, LG. Now, getting into speakers and audio, the first thing that I want to talk about is the placement of the speaker on the bottom. This right here is our speaker grill, and as I mentioned earlier, this is your microphone grill. The thing about the placement of these speakers is that it is very easy to accidentally block it, especially if you're just holding your phone like this, checking out a YouTube video or something. Your index finger is going to automatically fall over the speaker here, and you're always obstructing it. That's one thing that I'm not so keen about here. Same thing if you're somebody who holds your phone like this at the bottom with your pinky if you're texting, so it's very easy to obstruct that speaker. There are a variety of options to more or less get that speaker out of the way, so that was a little bit of a poor choice for me. This is a very nice flat edge at the bottom, and I would love it if I could use this for support of the phone rather than always obstructing the speaker. As for the quality of the speaker, I find that it doesn't give the punch that I would like it to. It's not incredibly loud. Also, when listening to things with heavy bass or higher frequencies, I notice that the speakers can't really handle it all that well. It starts to sound pretty fuzzy and low quality. If you want to experience music with this phone, I strongly recommend plugging in headphones, and a good pair of headphones at that. If you've taken any science classes in the past, you've seen that audio manifests itself as a waveform, like a sine wave. That's what we would call analog audio. So me right now, as I'm speaking, is just pushing particles in the air, and they're vibrating, and then you end up getting sound as a result. Well, the thing is that they have to record that actual sound, and it has to be converted from analog into digital. When you do that, you end up losing a lot of things depending on how badly you compress that audio. But these days, we're finally having manufacturers pay attention to the fact that we want to have that quality back in our audio. We want it back. So I think it's a definite step in the right direction that we're having players that are meant to play back high-fidelity sound, or high-quality sound. LG has designed the whole sound system in this phone to be able to play back audio at high fidelity. This phone is capable of playing back 192 kilohertz audio as a sampling rate, and also 24-bit, so you can play back very high-quality music, which a lot of people call studio master quality. So I'm hoping to see more of that in the future. Yes, I know the higher quality the sound file, the bigger it is, and we've had phones that have limited storage. So that's another mark that I'm making about the storage on this phone, that this one, that's not the Korean model, doesn't have an SD card slot. So if I want to play high quality audio, the one thing where they've taken a step back is that I can't really store all that many files on here. A lot of people have a very vast music library of hundreds of gigabytes of music, and you're stuck with 32. So imagine if you have 192 kilohertz audio, just one song could be well over 100 megabytes. So that's great, LG, that this can play back 192 kilohertz audio at 24-bit, but you're sure not giving a lot of space for that. Also, out on the market right now, you don't have a lot of files that are 192 kilohertz at 24 bits. Most things are compressed MP3, and that's honestly been good enough for people. So thanks, LG. That's a really great feature, but unfortunately right now on the market, we don't have audio files that are reaching that type of sampling rate. But this should be the future. And I'm seeing other phones come out, like the Galaxy Note 3, that's able to play back high-fidelity audio as well. The main thing here would be having players that can actually play it back and not have a bunch of distortion and not sound terrible. Audio on this phone actually sounds pretty good. It's got a good signal-to-noise ratio, and it's got also very little distortion. So I've enjoyed my time with this music player. It's actually been pretty clear sounding, except for the fact that I can only find Beethoven's Sonata right now at 192 kilohertz. But the idea is definitely moving in the right direction. Lastly, we're going to move on to the camera. We're going to look at the interface of the camera, and then we're also going to be looking at some samples of photos and videos so you can see what this guy is capable of. This is a 13 megapixel sensor that's optical image stabilized, as I had mentioned before, with a single LED flash. Another interesting thing about this camera is that you actually have recording from 3 separate microphones. As I had showed you, you have one here on the top, you've got a pinhole microphone right here on the case, and it also records audio from the microphone on the bottom. That seems to be for the zoom audio feature so that it can help to isolate audio, and I will be showing you that. So starting off with the interface, we've got my little Tamagotchi here. We're going to start at the left here. First button, of course, is controlling the flash. You can make sure that it's off, you can turn it on or have it on automatic. You've also got the ability to switch to the front-facing camera, the 2.1 megapixel front-facing camera. Hello! You've got modes and you've also got settings. So underneath mode, you've got various things. You can change the layout for starters if you don't really like this, if it looks busy to you, and if you want to know more about these features. You can see now in this particular view, it gives you a little preview of what these particular settings do. Now this is very Samsung-esque. They took this right out of Samsung's own book. A lot of this camera reminds me of a knockoff of Samsung. Heck, a lot of this phone reminds me of a knockoff of Samsung. But at least it's functional. So starting off, we have normal mode, which is nothing spectacular to write home about. Just the default mode of the camera where you can access all basic functions. You've got shot and clear. This is just like what's on the Galaxy S4. It takes several different shots and it analyzes them to try to remove anything that photobombed. You've got an HDR setting, which works great if you're taking photos of something that have varied types of lighting. Just say, for example, you have areas of shadow and areas of highlight. This is going to take 3 separate exposures so you can have a high dynamic range, one that favors shadows, midtones, and highlights, and it combines all those together, and it's a very nice setting to have. You've got panorama that speaks for itself, and then you've also got VR panorama, which is a 360-degree panorama. I've tested this guy out, and it's really not so impressive. I love Photosphere. Google's own Photosphere is really great. This works okay if you're only sweeping back and forth a little bit to get a wider angle view of what you're looking at, but once you try taking a 360-degree photo, it seems to get coordinates wrong, and you start seeing a door where a couch was supposed to be, so I wasn't so fond of VR panorama. You've got burst shot, take up to 20 shots quickly. This is something that's pretty much standard on every phone these days. You've got beauty shot. I tested this one out. It works well, although it doesn't seem to only analyze faces and smooth according to only a face. It seems to look at other things in the shots that could be face tones, and it will smooth that as well. So it works all right. It's just a little gimmicky. You've got dual camera. Of course, this is something that we also have on the Galaxy S4, although I saw it on the Optimus G Pro before I saw it on the Galaxy S4. You can use this also in video mode. So you got me here on the front-facing camera, and you've got my subject with the back-facing camera. So it's really nice if you want to take selfies and take a picture of a subject at the same time. You've got time catch shot. This is exactly like on the Galaxy S4 as well. You've got intelligent auto, automatically identifies the scene's characteristics and adjusts aperture, shutter speed, and other settings to take a photo. So dummy mode, basically. Capture fast-moving images without blur, so you're just going to adjust your shutter speed. And you've also got a night mode, which allows for longer exposure times, and it's great because this lens is optical image stabilized, so that really helps with taking those longer exposures. We've also got a settings mode here. There's several different things on here. This is just like what we see on the Galaxy S4 or other Samsung phones. If you say cheese, it's going to recognize what you said with your voice, and it's going to snap a picture. Brightness, I'm assuming that's an exposure compensation. I would rather it say exposure compensation, and it's just an exposure offset. We've got a focus mode. You've got auto, manual, and face tracking. Face tracking does all right. Manual, I'm actually appreciating. You've got macro mode all the way up to infinity. And just say that you can't get the camera to focus on whatever it is that you are looking at, or if you want to create some type of blur effect, you can do that. So here we have my little Tamagotchi, and I can then change the focus according to my own desires. So I find this to be a nice setting. You can control your image size. This is the 13 megapixel sensor, so this is going to be the max resolution. You've also got a couple different choices, all which have different aspects. 10 megapixels is going to be 16:9, 8 megapixels will be 4:3, and you've also got 1 megapixel 4:3. If you want all of these settings to show up, make sure that you're inside of normal mode. So you control ISO, or how much light is going into the lens. So you've got options for white balance. You've got real-time color effects, you've got a timer, auto review, which if any of you have had a digital camera in the past, it allows you to look at whatever it was that you took a photo of for a few seconds and then disappears. Geotagging, you can change the shutter sound. If you don't want to have a shutter, if you're trying to be discreet, this is great, just turn it off. You've also got the ability to map these volume keys on the back. You can map them to either take a picture, either the top or the bottom one will take a picture, or you can map these to be zoom function as well. And you've got a help mode which tells you about basic features, and then you can reset everything to default values. Now we're going to take a look at the camera mode. Everything on this side is exactly the same for controls. Right off the bat, there is a feature that I like. When you start recording, you have the ability to pause, just like you do inside of Samsung phones right now, so that you can keep that clip paused, go to somewhere else, and then continue recording without having to start another clip. So that's always a really great feature. It's just a blatant copycat though. Now, as far as focus during video, you have two different modes. You've got the continuous autofocus. I'm not too fond of the continuous autofocus mode because it seems a little bit unpredictable, and also the exposure seems a little bit unpredictable. The focusing seems to jump around quite a bit, and sometimes it doesn't respond right away to what you're looking at. You can remedy this by just simply touching on the image. Rather than tap to focus, I think that this enables some type of a tracking mode, so when you move your camera when you're recording, it's going to try to keep focus on whatever it was that you tapped on. I find this to be a little bit buggy as well. I'd rather have just full tap to focus than on a particular object, but it's better than nothing. Underneath modes, we've got a normal mode with default settings. We've got live effect, which allows you to distort faces in real time. It's kind of cute. So it evaluates your face, and it can make your mouth big, give you big eyes, give you a small mouth, big nose, small eyes, and it can squeeze your face. All this is done in real time. You've got the dual recording mode, which I pointed out with the dual camera mode. Looking a little bit more into it, of course, you can see me in that viewfinder there, but you can also choose what type of framing that you would like for this inset viewfinder. Then if you tap inside the image, you can choose to change it between the front-facing camera and also the back-facing camera. If you hold down on it, you can resize it, you can move it around at will. So it's a cute little feature that you can use in real time when recording. You've got a tracking zoom feature, which allows you to record the subject, and then you can take your little magnifying glass, and in the viewfinder here, you can zoom in on whatever it is that you want to pay extra special attention to. I can see this useful during certain events. Now this is a zoomed in image. It's not going to be of the best quality, but it's a fun little feature. Looking inside of the settings mode, we have audio zoom, which uses those three microphones. There's the one on the top, one right here on the back cover, and one on the bottom. It allows you to isolate certain sounds, so let's go ahead and turn it on. Let's go ahead and start recording a video. You see that you're presented with this circle here. This is your focusing circle. Now what you do with this is when you're recording a video, you can zoom in. Just say that there's a bunch of people on stage. That's the example that LG uses. You can start zooming in on what it is that you want to see in particular, such as your child's own face. And as you're zooming in, it's also zooming the audio. It's going to focus that audio on your child's face, so hopefully you can hear your child singing and also see your child's face up close. The one thing that disappoints me with this feature is I really wish that it did not have to actually zoom in the image as well. It would be nice if you could direct audio at a child's face without having to zoom in on that child's face as well. I don't want to be 25 feet away and have a grainy image of my child's face at all times. I want to be able to control that as well as zooming in on the audio. So I think this feature is a gimmick. I did try it out myself. It seems to be able to surely zoom in on the sound pretty well. But if you're in an area, just say that there's a lot of cars on the road. That was a situation that I found myself in trying to film my little brother. The cars make a type of a white noise, and that white noise does not really help this function at all.
I didn't go all over the store, I was only in one spot. I am talking!
Tell us what you saw in the toy store.
What?
What did you see in the toy store?
I said I did.
There was nothing in there?
Well, I wasn't really paying attention, I was just looking around.
So I could see a very marginal difference, but the overall feature is pretty disappointing unless you're in a quiet space where it can truly evaluate the sound that you're pointing at. But it is pretty cool that they designed this phone to have 3 separate microphones recording for the sake of this particular silly mode. Under here you can choose the video size and the frame rate. The first thing that we see here is 60 FPS or 60 frames per second progressive scan at 1080p. This is really nice. It's going to change the temporal resolution, or basically it makes a very big difference between filming and seeing people move around in 30 frames per second versus 60 frames per second, which gets closer and closer to real life. So I feel like I'm watching video when I watch this, and it feels a little bit more uncanny when I'm watching something at 60 frames per second, especially on a smartphone. smartphone. Movement just seems a lot more realistic and fluid. While this is a very awesome feature to have, it's pretty disappointing that they did not include a memory card slot. Hello! In your Korean version, you included a memory card slot. Now I realize that you've encased the battery in here and made it a special stacked kind. And that's a great feature and all, but you're seriously including 60 frames per second progressive scan and you're not giving us an SD card slot? That's worse than not having an expansion card slot for audio. So you've got all these advanced features and you do have 32 gigabytes of storage on this phone, which is actually quite a bit less. It's not 32 gigabytes, it's something like 26 gigabytes usable storage. So I feel a little bit insulted here. In this particular time and age, YouTube does not support 60 frames per second, so a lot of people are probably going to feel fine with just 30 frames per second. But in the future, when YouTube does support 60 frames per second, I really need to see these phone manufacturers stepping up storage and also including a memory card slot. So yes, if you are trying to record videos for YouTube, there's no point in using 60 frames per second. You've also got 720p, you've got QVGA, and you've also got the itty bitty tiny size for multimedia messaging. Again, we have exposure compensation, which they call brightness. You've got white balance settings, you've got real-time color effect, you've got your preview setting, geotagging, and you can also map these keys here on the back for record or zoom. Now we are looking at the video player that LG has included, and there's some interesting features inside of this video player. You do have the ability to take a snapshot inside of the video player, so that's great for screenshots during movies, or simply if you want to take a screenshot during anything that you recorded. They've also stayed true to their audio zoom function. If you click this button here, it's going to give you a choice between 3 different channels. You've got left, you've got center, and right audio channels. So if I want to hear only what's going on this side of the image, it's going to filter out everything else and only allow us to hear what's happening on the left side of the image. If you want to right center the audio, click on the right and it says center audio is focused. And same thing for the right hand side. You've also got the entertaining ability to track people's faces up close once you've already recorded the video. So for example, I'm going to hit play and here's this guy here. He looks like he has no idea what's going on. I can take my little magnifying glass, place it on his face, and it's going to track him the entire time. Now here we have the video playing normally. I wasn't filming this guy, but you can see that it actually did a pretty good job of tracking him. We've also got the ability to make our video into a Q-Slide application. If I click on this, I can get out of the Q-Slide application, and it brings me right back into the video application. You can throw out to a TV if you have a TV that works specifically with this, or if you have the accessory that works with this, and you can change the aspect inside of the video player. So there's a lot of nice features inside of this. Now, everything considered with what I have said about this camera and what I have showed you, we're going to go take a look at some images and some videos. The first thing that I want to say about this camera is that it tends to give me mixed emotions. I feel like it's trying to play with me. One minute I'm completely in love with this camera, and then the next minute I'm completely pissed off. As I have mentioned, this is a 13 megapixel camera, and some of the images that this camera is able to produce are amazing. The level of detail is astounding. Look at this pink flower here. Not only do I love the colors here, but I can just see so much detail in these petals. All of my general day-to-day type of pictures come out really lovely. I'm very happy with the colors here because I've seen a lot of cameras on phones and a lot of the times the colors just don't do any of it justice. So props to you, LG, you do make some pretty nice looking pictures. I used this phone as my travel camera while going through Washington, and some of the HDR pictures that I took were completely awesome. Even in settings with lower lighting, this camera had no issues whatsoever. I still see plenty of details in these images, and the colors are still really nice as well. Now, as for some issues with this camera, the one thing that I'm noticing most is that it tends to have some trouble with exposure. What I recommend is that if you have areas of very bright or areas of very dark, that you just let the camera do its own thing. It seems that the metering for the exposure only kicks in automatically. That's a real pity because I've seen that other cameras have metering with it. Like the Galaxy cameras, you can decide whether you want it to be spot, center weighted, or matrix. So tap to focus can give very varied results. I notice in general that this camera seems to burn all whites. It doesn't seem to handle brights very well at all. Anytime I take pictures of flowers, they're completely burned. If there's a bright setting with pavement and sky, it completely burns both of those. And it ruined this cute little picture of the hotel I was staying at. So I recommend either messing around with the exposure compensation, or you can try using the HDR setting. I did find some promising results with the HDR setting, and it seemed to force it away from burning things. Now to all of you pixel peepers out there, yes, I know you are there. To me, at face value, when these pictures come out well, they look really beautiful. Though if you want to know, when you zoom in really far, I'm able to see a lot of sharpening artifacts. I do see some slight light halos around branches, and I'm seeing a little bit of noise in the blue skies, although it isn't terrible. But overall, besides this and the burning and some issues with exposure, I think that they do a pretty good job. Yeah. Woo. Do your thing, sexy butt. This is a camera test. This is very, very, very bright outside right now. I'm just gonna see how it does. It's shooting at 60 frames per second. Although on YouTube it doesn't support 60 frames per second, sadly. But you have to see just how pretty this area is here in Washington. Look it up there. See how it does with the exposure in the sky. Now back down to a different exposure. Now we can look at the water here. Hopefully it'll get back into focus. Try to make sure there aren't any lens flares. It just ruins everything. Ooh. Cars on the side of the road. This is a good way to test image stabilization.
You're videotaping too?
Yes, we're driving slow enough for me to be able to test the image stabilization. Sanity. I suspect someone will try to come up and try to take my phone. Well, hello! So overall, I have really enjoyed using this just as a camera. I'm not so fond of the video on this camera, honestly, after seeing how it behaves with focus, especially when it bounces around a lot, and they give you tracking focus when I'd really just like normal tap to focus. I find the exposure to be really unpredictable, and a lot of things tend to be overexposed, and I'm hearing what sounds to be really aggressive noise canceling when in very quiet areas, which really shouldn't be there. So I much prefer to use this as just a camera. So while it's nice to have that 60p, I can't even use it on YouTube to show you all. I will put some links to Google Plus in the description so you can see the actual 60p versions of the videos that I put in here. But overall, like I said, I've got mixed feelings. Thank you everybody for watching. This has been Erica, the technology nerd who likes to film stuff. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. I hope I've helped you decide if this is the phone for you. This is a very interesting phone for me because there's a lot of things that I really like about this phone. And then, like I said in the beginning, it seems that they take a couple of steps backwards and they do some things that push an exciting feature forward, but then they kind of fall flat. But if you're looking for a phone other than what Samsung offers, with decent battery life and a pretty nice camera, I think that this might be a good choice for you, especially if you're somebody who likes to take pictures, because these are quite functional for that. I honestly would not get this phone for any of the features that LG pushes because they seem to be half-baked, unfinished, and a lot of them pretty much fall flat, but I give them points for effort. So let me know what you think about this phone, or if you have this phone, talk about your experiences in the comments below. So thank you everybody, have a good night!